Happy Friday to everyone. I hope we have had a wonderful, wonderful week. This is the last of my elementary series. Had third, fourth, and fifth grade this week webinars, but welcome to the Access and the Georgia Milestones, resources and strategies for math constructed responses and extended responses. This is the fifth grade session number 1. I am Sawanda Coffee, and I am the math mentor here at West Georgia RESA. First, I'd like to start off, of course, by letting everyone know, the purpose of the webinars that we're going to provide each month throughout the school year. And it's just, to provide new teachers, teachers that have been, teaching for a while. It's just another resource that we're going to provide as a courtesy to everyone, because I know everybody is busy. We're constantly talking about the Georgia Milestones, what it is, what does it look like. So we're just going to serve as another place where you can come and get some resources from. You can take back to your staff if you would like to do that. Due to the time frame of the webinars, for this first month, definitely we will only be able to cover about 1 to 2 questions. Most of the time it won't be no more than that, just due to the 30 minutes that we have together. The series, I said before, will be conducted each month. They are for grades 3 through 10. So, of course, I'm asking everyone, if you have other team members that may be interested, if you have friends or family members that teach different grade levels, then, just let them know that this is going to be another resource that's available to them if they would like that. The format for each of the webinars will pretty much be the same. If you've joined me another day this week, my theme has pretty much been the same. So it will pretty much be like that for my elementary, and then I have a different set for middle school and then high school. In the webinars, we will be looking at standards, maybe 1 standard or no more than 2. A lesson essential question will be provided. I will also integrate the standards for mathematical practice into the webinars so we can get more familiar with those and actually start implementing those in our classes. And of course, we'll be looking at the actual assessment item, and then we will look at some scored student work that relates to that assessment item. Right, the norms. If you notice, you are muted, and you will be muted during this presentation. The reason being is, just to cut down on some of the feedback that we may have. Of course, you may type in questions on the presentation, and if I overlook one of your questions, I do apologize up front. I'm getting accustomed to the GoToWebinar, so I may overlook a question, but of course, I can always go back and see it and address it to you. If I do not get to your question during the webinar, then those questions will be consolidated, and I will answer them and send the answers back to you via email. At the end of each presentation, there will be a link to the recording uploaded to the West Georgia RESA site. And what I will do is, after it has been uploaded to the website, I will send you out the link and also a copy of the PowerPoint that has been used for that particular session. You're always welcome to email me if you have any questions. Please email me if you want to see some different things, because like I said, the format itself is pretty much the same. But of course, I am very flexible. I want you all to get the most out of it, especially if you can use this in your building to help your teachers just kind of get a look of what the assessment items will look like. All right, next, just a little brief review of the Georgia Milestones and the item types that will be coming out. Of course, there will be 3 item types, and that is the selected response, which we know as the multiple choice, which is for all content areas. The constructed response, which is going to be for ELA and mathematics only. Extended response, which is going to be only for the ELA and mathematics classes. Some quick definitions of just the constructed response and what makes the constructed response and the extended response different from each other. Well, with the constructed response, we've just been pretty much carrying on the same definitions throughout is the constructive response is a general term for an assessment item that requires the student to generate a response as opposed to selecting a response, like the multiple choice, for instance. Extended response items require more elaborate answers and explanation of reasoning. They allow for multiple correct answers and, different methods of actually solving the extended response item. One way or one suggestion as a teacher, and if you're an administrator and you want to, kind of assist your staff into transitioning these constructive response and extended response items into your class, and you want to really know where to start, we want to guide the students or train the students, whatever the word you would like to use, into being able to think about the process, the actual process of how to solve the question. We don't want them to jump straight to the answer. We want them to come up with a logical explanation of what is the process that I am going to take to solve that. When we have gotten the students to that point, then we want to actually encourage them and eventually require of them that they write that process in complete sentences at all times. And this is a gradual thing. So it's good to maybe, start this process if you have not already on Monday to, because by the time that your test comes around, you want the kids to be very familiar with what is expected of them. And they are expected to know and be able to write about the process. Then, of course, in the end, we want them to actually answer the assessment item in its entirety. All right, our standard for today is coming from OA1 from the fifth grade. Use parentheses, brackets, or braces in numerical expressions and evaluate expressions with these symbols. Now, the lesson essential question for today is, how do we evaluate expressions using parentheses, brackets, or braces in numerical expressions? If you have joined me for another webinar this week, the assessment item that we're going to be reviewing today is a little bit different, but it is an example of what can show up on the Georgia Milestones. So keep that in mind. Let's talk about the standards for mathematical practice. I will go ahead and pretty much ask that if you have not been planning to demonstrate the standards for mathematical practice in your classroom, then once again, this is another area that you can kind of work in over the next few weeks. Teachers should definitely, put these standards for mathematical practice into your lesson plans and be prepared with questions for the students to help them to start demonstrating some of the student behaviors. So what I'm about to provide to you is teacher behaviors, teacher questioning, and student behaviors that's related to the standards for mathematical practice. Standard 1 is make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. So some teacher behaviors is, of course, providing rich problems aligned to the standards. This is something that should be done on a daily basis. If you do not have resources in your building that is, helping you to address this particular behavior, please send me an email and I can help you out with that. But we should definitely be providing some very good questions when we're talking about constructive response questions and extended response questions in your class on a daily basis. The second behavior is provide an appropriate time for students to engage in the productive struggle of problem solving. I've said this and I will continue to say that it's okay as a teacher if you allow a student to struggle. They need that time to kind of, think through their thoughts and be able to determine what is it that I need to start doing to even address the problem. So to give them that time of struggle, it is okay. Some questions that you may ask them is, how is blank's way of solving the problem like or different from yours? And of course, we want to know why or why not. And that is, we'll talk later about, those having the students to actually, complete their thought process into sentences. The second question or another question that could be asked is, what tools or manipulatives might help you. And remember that this is a question that you're asking the student. So if a student is able to tell you exactly what they need to help them, then please be able to provide that to them. Student behaviors, reading the problem carefully, checking answers and making sure solutions are reasonable and they make sense, discussing the meaning of the problem with classmates. We always want to encourage students to talk to each other, to let each other know, how that they, come across with answering the question, what steps did they use, what process did they come across. So, having that demonstrated by the students, once again, it would increase the students' actual knowledge of the content that you're covering. Standard 5 is another standard that will be addressed in the assessment item. I'm not sure if I said that before, but these standards for mathematical practice that I've covering is related to the assessment item that we're going to actually see. So standard 5 says use appropriate tools strategically. The teacher behaviors is making a variety of tools readily accessible to students and allowing them to select appropriate tools for themselves. So if you have, like base 10 blocks from maybe a different, if you have just some squares, if you're talking about if you're just, going on a number line, if you need to use squares or number lines, graph paper, markers, color pencils, whatever it is that the students may need to help them, then provide that to them, whether that can be as a space in your room where you have the resources, or if you have your students grouped together, then they can have a resource bin at their table. But just, making sure that they have something that can help them. Some questions that you may ask is how could you use manipulatives or drawing, to show your thinking? What other resources could help you solve this problem? Once again, that's if a student can tell you, what they need, or, what they need to help them solve the problem, then you know that they are on a good track to knowing what is expected. Some student behavior is using technological tools to explore and deepen understanding. We know kids are very savvy in technology these days. So if you have those resources, have them available to your students. The last standard for mathematical practice that is going to be addressed in this assessment item that we're going to look at today is standard 6. It says attend to precision. Teacher behaviors related to that is explicitly teaching mathematics vocabulary. If you see any of the webinars from this point, you'll probably see this one most often because it is very important that we explicitly teach mathematics vocabulary. Some teachers may ask, when do I do that? It could be, you can have a time period in your teaching block that you do this right after the students come in and do whatever their bell work may be. You may want to go ahead and cover that vocabulary, but just find time to actually teach the mathematics vocabulary. Another teacher behavior requires students to answer problems with complete sentences, including units. Once again, we see that here in Standard 6, requiring those students to complete their answers using complete sentences. So remember some of these behaviors for when we get to the assessment item that we're going to look at. Some question or a question that you may ask is, what does the word blank mean? And you want them to explain what they did, to solve the problem. And of course, we want our students to be able to communicate precisely using clear language and accurate mathematics vocabulary. So once again, if they can communicate well, they can be able to tell you exactly what they need, then of course we're increasing their knowledge on the content. Now, if you notice, there's some red, it says TEKS numbers behind the TEKS word. What these are, or what they are, is the teacher behaviors and the student behaviors have been aligned to your TAPS standards. So you know that you're currently, if you're a teacher, you're currently being evaluated on the 10 tap standard. So how we read this is, for instance, we have TEKS 1.5. That means that this particular teacher behavior is aligned to standard number 1. And then the number that comes behind it is one of a number of performance indicators that the state has kind of listed. So you can go back, if you have not already, and look at the fact sheets for the 10 TAP standards. They are located on the Georgia DOE site. So you can kind of know that, what's aligned from the standards for mathematical practice. I would definitely use this. This is somewhat like a little cheat sheet for you. So when your administrator comes in to do an observation, then you can be actually, demonstrating these behaviors, and you can pretty much get on that level 3. Okay, the constructive response assessment item. I will read it as you look over it. What I would like for you all to do is, of course, quickly work out the problem, and let's see if you come up with the correct answer. The question is, what is the value of the expression below? You have 24 plus 9 minus, then you have parentheses, 4 times 2 plus 11, and then all that's divided by 2. And of course, this was an actual question on a test. Now, each month, what I will be doing is providing a resource of the month. And this month, I am highlighting assessment items from Engage New York. This has been a state recommended item from the Georgia DOE. They have very good questions out there. So we're just going to be looking at the Engage New York sample today. The website for Engage New York, I will provide that at the end of the presentation. Also, if you have your answer, I would like for you to go ahead and type that in. And also, once again, think about the standards for mathematical practice that we just talked about. We just talked about number 1, number 5, and number 6. And in order to become comfortable with demonstrating the behaviors, then you have to, of course, practice those behaviors. So let's see. Now, what I've been providing this week with my other webinars is strategies to address the problem. And even though this is not one of those lengthy word problems, this problem solving framework that was adapted from Robert Kaplinski, it still works and it still pertains to what we're doing here. So it says, what problem are you trying to figure out? And I do see some of the answers as well, and I thank you all for that. What problem are you trying to figure out? Of course, this is just the question that's being asked. What guesses do you have? Now, this is one of those times where you want to increase the dialogue or, the participation of your students. You want to definitely ask this question, and we're just taking guesses. Okay, so we want everybody to, feel like they're part of the class, they're part of the discussion, whether they know how to do it or not. We just want to solicit answers from them. So how this one particular question goes is, you have this question and you ask students to provide guesses. What do they think, just by looking at the operations of the problem? What do they think the answer may be? Okay. And what you would do is just take the first answer from any student and say if that number is 9. Okay. Then what you want to start doing is ask the students, okay, well, who has a answer that is lower than 9? And you continue to do this process until you've gotten the lowest number that, that the student has given. So that, say that answer may be 5. The lowest answer is 5. You would do the same thing for the students that may have an answer that's greater than 9. So of course you would ask the students, okay, well, who has an answer that's greater than 9? You continue this until you have an answer that is the highest answer. So say this may be 20. So what you have created at this time is everybody in the class has provided some type of response. They're engaged in, okay, well, I've given an answer, so I'm a part of this right now. They may not have the right answer, and at this time is irrelevant. So now we have the whole class, and you can say, okay, now class, we have our answer is going to be somewhere between 5 and 20. Okay. And so you just move on to the next thing. And of course, at the end, you will see what it is. What do you already know from the problem? Of course, this is the time where the students would just pick out exactly what is it that they know in this particular problem. Do they know exactly what the brackets mean, what the parentheses mean? The next question is, what do you need to know to solve the problem? Once again, we saw this behavior talked about in the standards for mathematical practice. Do they know what they need to solve the problem? What should the title of this problem or lesson be? Some people may ask, why is this question in here? But of course, by this time, you want to bring the students back to the focus of the problem. What is it that I need to be doing? So they can actually, title it off of that question. Provide all of your work while working on a problem. This is their work session. This is their work area. So let them just be able to write as much as they would like to help them solve the problem. And lastly is, what is your conclusion and how did you reach that conclusion? Now, the last bulleted item is designed for students to write their response in complete sentences. When we talk about conclusion, this is where we want to encourage them to write in complete sentences. What were your thoughts? How did you come to that? What method did you use? And see how far they can go with that. I will go ahead and tell you now that this is just one example of a problem solving strategy. It is not the problem solving strategy that could be used. Now, some other things that I've seen over the last couple of days, our teachers may use, I think it's called cubes. That was a suggestion given to me to share with everybody else. So I'm not sure how many teachers are familiar with that. If you have a problem solving strategy that you are currently using and it has been effective for you, please send that to me so I can share it with my other groups. But this particular, problem solving framework, it can be used in whole group, small group. If you want to use it on an individual level, you can use it with skill work, just real quick, short answer type things, or even performance tasks. So just know that it is available to you. All right, let's quickly look at this rubric. The state of New York uses this 2-point scoring rubric to score their short answer responses. And since I am highlighting their resource for the month, I did use their rubric. So with their 2-point rubric, it just pretty much says that it includes a correct solution to the question and demonstrates a thorough understanding of the mathematical concepts. The response itself indicates that the student has completed the task correctly using mathematically sound procedures, contains sufficient work to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the mathematical concepts, and then it may contain inconsequential errors that do not distract from the correct solution. The Georgia DOE in their archive webinars, and you'll see the link at the end of that, and I'll talk more about that when I get to the end, provides a different type of rubric that is leveled. I think it's like 4 levels. So that is another resource that, of course, it will be integrated into our presentation on another month. But, there are different options. It's whatever you are most comfortable with. So that is if a student scores 2 points. Now let's look at if a student scores 1 point, then that response correctly addresses only some elements of the task. It may contain an incorrect solution, but applies a mathematically appropriate process, or it may contain the correct solution, but required work is incomplete. So they may have most of the things that they need. They just may have, messed up on one particular area. And lastly, if a student scores 0 points out of 2 points, then that response is just pretty much incorrect, irrelevant, incoherent, or contains a correct solution obtained using an obviously incorrect procedure. Some of the elements may contain correct mathematical procedures, but when you holistically look at the problem and the work, it doesn't, it doesn't show that the student knows enough. So let's see how we did. Now, I know this may be a little difficult for you to see, but the question again is, what is the value of the expression below? What I have done, and I'm going to show you on the next slide, is pretty much just retype this so you can kind of see what the student did in their steps. So this is the same student. Like I said, I just went and just retyped what they had so you can see what they did. They first, of course, multiplied the 4 times the 2 to get the 8. Then combined the 24 and 9. And so their final answer was 18. And their score was 2 out of 2 points. Once again, the response answered the question correctly and demonstrates a thorough understanding of the mathematical concepts in the task. They correctly followed the order of operations, and all of their calculations are correct. This is another student that chose a different route to actually, go about solving their problem. They did score a 2 out of 2, but if you see, this was the first step that they did. This was their second step, and this is their third step, and then they came over to their fourth step to end up with an answer of 18. So once again, how we talked about those standards for mathematical practice, being able to provide a student with a problem, but then they come up with different ways of solving it. This is just another way of a student demonstrating their knowledge of their understanding. All right, this is the student that scored 1 point out of 2, and the response is only partially correct, and we'll see where they went wrong at. The response contained an incorrect solution, which they ended up with 16, but applies a mathematically appropriate process, which means they, were pretty much trying to follow the order of operations, but they just ended up messing up on the 36 divided by 216. So they ended up with that particular result. But if you can, when you're using this in your class and you can see that your students, were pretty much on the right track, and at some point in time they missed a step or they calculated incorrect, is not totally incorrect. So, just think about that. So about starting to use rubrics inside of your classroom. Once again, this is another student who scored a 1 out of 2 points. Once again, only partially correct. Their response contains an incorrect solution of 26, but applies a mathematically appropriate process. So the response follows the order of operations, but the calculation in the third step, which was right here, the 38 minus 8, this particular student added instead of subtracted. And then this student scored 0 points out of 2. And the response correctly shows the first and second steps. However, holistically, because this student answer ended up being 20, the mathematical procedures are not sufficient to demonstrate even a limited understanding of the mathematical concepts embodied in the task. Okay. Last thing before we get to the end of the webinar is feedback. I have to stress that written and verbal feedback must be given frequently to your students. As teachers, we are currently in the midst of the TEKS evaluation. So of course, when we are evaluated, we want to, be provided with feedback, and we want to know how can we become better. So I think the students deserve the same right. So if you're not, once again, incorporating this particular strategy in your class, then I, definitely suggest you work on that and work that into your lesson plans. Is when would I give feedback to my students? When I say verbally, we do it all the time. Written, we may not do it as often, but it should definitely be written feedback so the students can take it back to their desk and be able to reference it when they need it, when they're going back and actually correcting their mistakes. Feedback must be provided to tell the student their next steps in moving towards mastering the standard. Once again, we should always provide the what is it that they did not quite get correct, but then explain to them, okay, this is what you may need to actually do to move to the next level. Not necessarily telling them exactly what to do. For instance, if they made a calculation error, don't tell them where the calculation error is. Just say, hey, you made a mistake. Go back and kind of go through your steps, so they can be able to identify where they made the mistake at. Do not just give them the answer, because then they're only going to go back and do what you pretty much tell them to do. So keep that in mind when you're providing that feedback. And lastly, use the language of the standards when providing feedback. Whatever standard that you may be covering or in your class, make sure that you use that actual standard in your feedback. Okay. We are at the end. And once again, it is Friday. Happy Friday to everyone. Now, if you have any questions, once again, like I said, please give me, provide an email, whatever your questions may be. If you need some resources, if you're looking for a little bit more in the webinars, just let me know that. Once again, I am flexible. The references, of course, the resource of the month is Engage New York. And I'm only doing one resource a month just so I can introduce that one resource to the teachers, and you all can become familiar with that resource before we move on to another one. It would be a totally different resource next month. And the Shell Mathematics Assessment Project, I may or may not incorporate that in here. I just added it as a different resource. I think some of us are using that. They are already embedded inside of the Georgia frameworks. So I wasn't going to add to it. Same thing with the frameworks. I may or may not cover some of those because they're already there for you. I want to bring you suggested resource items that you may not come across that often. Lastly, the Georgia DOE archive webinars. I would suggest that you go and look at those. The webinars that I am going to be presenting each month are not in lieu of what the Georgia DOE has out there for us. We want to, just go and, because they've actually created some for the elementary level, the middle school level, and the high school level. That is about 30 minutes as well, just highlighting the questions that we pretty much have looked at. So I thank you again. I want you to have a wonderful weekend. And if you have any questions, like I said, just email me. See you guys next month.